Some men wake up knowing exactly where they are. Callahan Reed wasn't one of them. The last thing he remembered was the taste of copper in his mouth and the sand burning through his clothes. Now he was staring up at a woman who stood over him like a monument carved from stone itself. She wasn't offering water. She wasn't offering mercy. She was studying him the way a craftsman studies raw material, deciding if it's worth the effort to shape into something useful. What Callahan didn't know was that none hadn't stumbled upon him by accident. She'd been searching, and what she wanted from him would force him to choose between the man he'd been and the only chance he had left to survive. 3 hours earlier, Callahan had been convinced he was going to die alone. The horse had thrown him near a dried riverbed, and by the time he dragged himself into the shade of a rock formation, his canteen was empty, and his vision was starting to fold in on itself. He'd made it 2 weeks through territory that locals refused to travel, convinced he could find a shortcut to the mining settlements on the other side of the canyon lands. Arrogance, his father used to say, was just another way of asking the world to teach you a lesson. The lesson arrived in the form of complete silence. No wind, no birds, just the hammer of sun on stone and the feeling that something was watching him from the ridge above. Callahan tried to stand twice. Both times his legs folded. The third time, he didn't bother trying. He closed his eyes and thought about his sister's face. The way she'd looked at him when he told her he was leaving, like she knew he wouldn't come back. When he opened his eyes again, the woman was there. She stood 8 feet away, perfectly still, her shadow falling across his chest like a claim. She was taller than any woman he'd ever seen, with a build that suggested she could break a man in half if she decided it was necessary. Her hair fell in 2 thick braids over her shoulders, and she wore leather decorated with patterns he didn't recognize. Bone and stone hung from her neck in layers. Her eyes moved over him slowly, cataloging every detail, and Callahan felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt small. She spoke. The language rolled out in sounds he couldn't separate into words, but the tone was clear. She wasn't asking a question. She was making a statement. When he didn't respond, she crouched down, still maintaining distance, and tilted her head. Her gaze moved from his face to his hands, lingering on the calluses, then to the knife still strapped to his belt. She stood again and gestured once, a sharp motion toward the east. Callahan tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. He managed to rasp out a single word: water. She didn't move. For a moment, he thought she was going to leave him there. But then she made another gesture, more insistent this time, and 2 figures appeared from behind the rocks. Men younger, both watching Callahan with expressions that made it clear they didn't approve of whatever was happening. One of them said something sharp to the woman. She responded without looking at him, her voice carrying the kind of authority that didn't require volume. They lifted Callahan by his arms, and the world tilted sideways. He tried to keep his eyes open, tried to make sense of where they were taking him, but the heat and dehydration were dragging him down. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was the woman walking ahead of them, her stride steady and certain, like someone who'd already decided how this was going to end. When he woke again, he was lying on woven blankets inside a structure made of branches and hide. The air was cooler. Someone had given him water, and through the gap in the entrance, he could see the woman sitting outside, her back straight, her hands resting on her knees. She wasn't looking at him, but Callahan had the distinct feeling that she knew the exact moment his eyes had opened, that she'd been waiting for it, and that whatever came next wasn't going to be anything like rescue. Callahan spent the first 2 days drifting in and out of awareness, his body pulling him under every time consciousness tried to surface. When he finally managed to stay awake for more than an hour, he discovered that staying alive came with conditions. The younger men who'd carried him brought food and water, but they did it with the kind of silence that made it clear he wasn't welcome. One of them, lean and sharp-eyed, would set the bowl down just outside arm's reach, forcing Callahan to crawl for it. The message was obvious. You're here because she allows it, not because we want you here. Neon appeared twice each day, once at dawn and once as the light turned amber across the canyon walls. She never spoke to him directly. Instead, She would crouch at the entrance of the shelter, her presence filling the space, and watch him eat. The first time Callahan tried to say something, tried to form the words, "Thank you," but she held up one hand, stopping him cold. The gesture wasn't harsh. It was absolute. When she was ready for him to speak, she would let him know. On the third day, Callahan was strong enough to sit up without his vision swimming. He noticed details he'd missed before. The camp was small, maybe 15 people, but it felt organized with a precision that suggested they'd moved many times before. Shelters were arranged in a loose circle, each positioned to maximize shade and line of sight. Children played near the center, their laughter quick and bright, while older women worked on tasks he couldn't identify from a distance. Everyone moved with purpose. No wasted motion, no idle hands, and everyone watched him. Not openly, but Callahan had spent enough time in places where he wasn't wanted to recognize the weight of collective judgment. These people had seen outsiders before. They knew what men like him brought with them. Trouble at best, violence at worst. The fact that Negan had chosen to bring him here didn't erase that history. It made them more suspicious, not less. By the fourth day, Callahan could stand. He made his way outside, testing his legs, and found none speaking with 3 older members of the group. They stood in a tight cluster, their voices low but animated. And when one of the men gestured sharply in Callahan's direction, Nazone's response was immediate. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Whatever she said ended the conversation completely. The others dispersed, and she turned to face Callahan with an expression that gave away nothing. She walked toward him slowly, closing the distance until she stood close enough that he could see the small scars along her forearms. The kind that came from a lifetime of work that tested skin and bone. She was taller than him by at least 3 inches. And up close, the sheer physical presence of her was even more striking. This wasn't a woman who'd been chosen to lead because of lineage or luck. She'd earned it by being stronger, smarter, and more relentless than everyone around her. She reached out and placed one hand on his shoulder, her grip firm, and spoke a single word in her language. Then she pointed toward the eastern edge of camp, where a path led up into the rocks. The meaning was clear. Walk. Prove you can. Callahan managed 10 minutes before his legs started shaking. Neon walked beside him the entire time, matching his pace, never offering help. When he finally stopped, bracing himself against a boulder, she studied him again with that same appraising look. Then she nodded once, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. That night, Callahan lay awake listening to the sounds of the camp settling into sleep. Through the gaps in the shelter, he could see Nun sitting by the fire, her profile outlined in orange light. She wasn't looking at him, but he knew somehow that she was thinking about him, calculating, planning. And for the first time since waking up here, Callahan realized something that made his chest tighten. She wasn't keeping him alive out of kindness. She was preparing him for something that required him to be strong enough to endure it. The confrontation came on the 6th day. Callahan was helping carry water from the spring, trying to make himself useful, when the lean man who'd been bringing his meals stepped directly into his path. Up close, Callahan could see he was younger than he'd first appeared, maybe 25, with eyes that burned with something deeper than simple dislike. The man said something sharp, gesturing between Callahan and the camp. And though Callahan couldn't understand the words, the meaning was crystal clear. You don't belong here. Others gathered, forming a loose semicircle. Callahan sat down the water container slowly, keeping his hands visible, every instinct telling him that one wrong move would turn this into something he couldn't walk away from. The young man moved closer, his hand resting on the knife at his belt, and spoke again, louder this time. A challenge. Neon's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She appeared from between 2 shelters, her stride eating up the ground, and when she reached them, she positioned herself directly between Callahan and the young man. The words she spoke were measured, but carried the weight of absolute authority. The young man responded, his voice rising, gesturing at Callahan with barely contained anger. Nazone let him finish. Then she placed one hand on his chest, not pushing, just marking the boundary, and spoke again. The young man's face twisted. Whatever she'd said, it wasn't what he wanted to hear. He looked past her to Callahan, and the hatred there was so pure it made Callahan's skin prickle. But he didn't cross the line none had drawn. After a long moment, he spat something that sounded like a curse and walked away. The others dispersed slowly, reluctantly, leaving Callahan standing alone with Neon. She turned to face him, and for the first time, Callahan saw something other than calculation in her expression. There was frustration there, maybe even doubt. She gestured for him to follow and led him away from the camp, up a narrow trail that wound through rock formations shaped by wind and time. They walked for 20 minutes in complete silence, climbing higher until the camp below looked small and temporary against the vastness of the land. Naju stopped at a flat outcropping that overlooked the canyon. She stood at the edge, her arms crossed, and when she finally spoke, it was in broken fragments of his language. Words she'd clearly learned from traders or travelers. Her accent was thick, the grammar rough, but the meaning came through. My people, small. She held up her hand, fingers spread, then closed 3 of them. Was many, now few. Callahan waited, understanding that this was more than she'd shared with anyone in a long time. Need strong. She touched her chest, then gestured to the camp below. Need future. Need blood that fights. She turned to look at him directly, and the intensity in her gaze made it hard to breathe. I see you in desert, dying, still fighting, still trying. She tapped her temple. Strong here. Then her chest. Strong here. The pieces started falling into place, forming a picture that Callahan hadn't wanted to see. She hadn't saved him because she was kind. She'd saved him because she needed what he represented. New strength, new possibilities, a way to keep her people from disappearing completely. The young one, Callahan said carefully. He was supposed to be chosen, wasn't he? Nazon's expression hardened. She didn't confirm it with words, but she didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. How many others wanted that honor? Callahan asked. She held up 2 fingers. 3 men who'd expected to be selected. 3 men who now saw him as someone who'd stolen what should have been theirs. Najon moved closer, her presence filling his entire field of vision. She placed both hands on his shoulders, holding him in place, and spoke slowly, making sure he understood every word. You choose. You stay, you live. You go, you die. She released him and stepped back. I choose you. Now you choose. She walked back down the trail, leaving Callahan alone on the outcropping with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. Beautiful, merciless, and completely indifferent to whether he survived or not. Behind him, he heard footsteps, light, deliberate. Someone had followed them up the trail, and somehow Callahan knew it wasn't someone who wanted to see him make it back down alive. Callahan turned slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. The lean man from earlier stood 15 feet away, his hand resting on his knife, his body coiled tight with intention. Behind him, the sun was dropping toward the horizon, turning the sky copper and gold. Beautiful timing for something ugly. The man spoke, his voice steady and cold. Callahan didn't need translation. The message was in the stance, in the way he'd positioned himself between Callahan and the path down. This wasn't going to end with words. I don't want to fight you, Callahan said, knowing the man probably couldn't understand, but needing to say it anyway. She made her choice. That's between you and her. The man spat to the side and drew his knife. The blade caught the light, well-maintained and sharp. This wasn't a tool. It was a weapon he knew how to use. He moved forward 3 steps, closing the distance, and Callahan's options narrowed to almost nothing. Run, and he'd get a knife in his back. Fight, and he'd likely lose. Stand still, and he'd definitely die. Callahan raised his hands, palms out, and took 1 step back toward the edge of the outcropping. The man smiled, thin and mirthless, thinking he'd cornered his prey. He moved faster, covering the ground between them, and Callahan did the only thing that made sense. He dropped low, grabbed a handful of loose rock and sand, and threw it directly into the man's face. The man jerked back, one hand coming up instinctively, and Callahan used the half-second of confusion to rush forward. He caught the man's knife arm at the wrist, twisted hard, and brought his other elbow up into the man's ribs. The impact drove the air from both of them, and they went down in a tangle of limbs and dust. The knife skittered away across the stone. They rolled twice, each trying to gain position, and Callahan realized with cold certainty that the man was stronger than he looked, faster, too. A fist connected with Callahan's jaw, snapping his head sideways. And for a moment, the world went white at the edges. He felt hands on his throat, squeezing, and instinct took over. He drove his knee up hard, once, twice, until the grip loosened enough for him to break. Free. Callahan scrambled backward, gasping, and saw the man reaching for the knife. Without thinking, Callahan kicked it over the edge of the outcropping. The blade tumbled down into the rocks below. Lost, the man's face twisted with rage, and he lunged forward with bare hands, going for Callahan's throat again. This time, Callahan was ready. He sidestepped, caught the man's momentum, and used it to send him stumbling toward the edge. The man's feet slid in the loose gravel, arms windmilling. And for one terrible moment, Callahan thought he was going to fall. But the man caught himself, dropping to his knees, breathing hard. They stared at each other across 10 feet of stone, both bleeding, both exhausted. The man's expression had changed. The hatred was still there, but something else had crept in underneath. Respect maybe, or at least recognition that Callahan wasn't easy prey. Footsteps echoed up the trail, multiple people moving fast. Nazone appeared first, her eyes taking in the scene instantly. Behind her came 2 older men, and when they saw what had happened, their faces hardened. One of them barked something at the lean man, who slowly got to his feet, still watching Callahan with unreadable eyes. None walked past Callahan without looking at him and stood before the young man. She didn't raise her voice, but the words she spoke carried enough weight to make him flinch. When she finished, she pointed down the trail. The man hesitated, glanced once more at Callahan, then started walking. The 2 older men followed, leaving Callahan alone with none. She turned to him, examining the blood at the corner of his mouth, the marks already darkening on his throat. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out and touched the bruise forming along his jaw, her fingers surprisingly gentle. "Good," she said in her broken version of his language. "You fight smart, not just strong." She stepped back and looked toward the camp below, where fires were being lit against the coming darkness. "Tomorrow we talk. Tomorrow you understand everything." She walked away, leaving Callahan standing alone on the outcropping, tasting blood and wondering what understanding everything was going to cost him. Dawn came cold and sharp. Callahan woke to find an older woman sitting outside his shelter, waiting. She gestured for him to follow, and they walked through the quiet camp to a larger structure at the far edge, set apart from the others. Inside, Najoni sat with 3 elder women, all of them watching as Callahan entered. The space felt formal, purposeful. This wasn't a casual conversation. This was ceremony. Neon gestured to a spot across from her, and Callahan sat, feeling the weight of 4 pairs of eyes measuring him. One of the elder women spoke first, her voice carrying the texture of decades. And though Callahan couldn't understand the words, he recognized the cadence. She was telling a story about loss, if he read the sorrow in her expression correctly, about necessity. When she finished, Nazone leaned forward, her hands resting on her knees. She spoke slowly, choosing each word with care, building sentences in his language piece by piece. "My people are dying, not from war, not from hunger, from forgetting how to be strong." She paused, making sure he understood. "We are 15 was 50. Every year, fewer children, fewer warriors. The blood is too close. Brother, sister, cousin, all the same family, children born weak. Some die young, others never born at all." One of the elder women added something, her voice bitter, and Najon nodded. "Other tribes take our young men. Better offer, stronger family, we lose them. And women who stay, they have no one to choose who is not blood." Callahan felt his chest tighten as the picture became clear. This wasn't just about tradition or preference. This was about survival. The clan was collapsing inward. The gene pool too shallow to sustain itself. Basic biology wrapped in desperation. I am matriarch. None continued. I choose for the people, not for myself. She touched her chest. I have no children, no husband. I wait for the right choice. Strong blood, smart blood. Someone who fights to live even when dying. She stood and moved closer, crouching in front of him so their eyes were level. I watch you in the desert. You are alone, hurt, water gone. Any man would lay down and die. But you keep trying. You drag yourself into shade. You protect your knife even when you can barely move. This tells me what you are inside. Callahan's mouth went dry. You want me to father your children, not just mine. None gestured to the elder women. We have 4 women of age. Strong, healthy, no husband. They need children, or their line ends. I need you to give our people a future that does not die with us. The words hung in the air between them, enormous and impossible. Callahan tried to process what she was asking. Not just one child, not just with her. She was asking him to become the cornerstone of an entire generation, to tie himself to this place, these people permanently. And if I refuse, Nazon's expression didn't change. Then you leave with food and water. We point you to the nearest settlement. 3 days walk. You go back to your life. She paused. But you should know the young man yesterday. He is not the only one who thinks my choice is wrong. If you stay and say no, they will see weakness. They will see insult. And I cannot protect you from what happens then. One of the elder women spoke, her tone gentle despite the harsh reality of her words. Nazon translated. She says you have until tomorrow's dawn. She says, choose with your mind and your heart. Both must agree, or you will regret it. Nazon stood, placing one hand briefly on his shoulder. The gesture felt different now. Less like evaluation, more like hope. Come, I show you something. She led him outside, and Callahan followed, his mind spinning with impossible choices. Stay and become something he'd never imagined. Leave and wonder for the rest of his life if he'd walked away from the only thing that had ever truly needed him. At the center of camp, children played in the morning light, their laughter high and pure. None stopped watching them, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made Callahan's throat tighten. That sound dies with us if you go. No children, no laughter, no future, just old people waiting to become dust. She turned to look at him. You think about that. You decide if their silence is worth your freedom. She walked away, leaving Callahan standing there, watching children who might be the last generation, listening to laughter that might be the last echo of something about to disappear forever. Callahan spent the day walking the edges of camp, thinking every path his mind took led back to the same impossible junction. Stay and become something unrecognizable. Leave and carry the weight of what he'd refused for the rest of his life. Neither option felt like freedom. Both felt like different types of cage. He thought about his sister, the way she'd looked at him when he told her he was leaving to find something worth doing. He'd spent 3 years drifting from one mining camp to another, one failed venture after another, looking for purpose in places that had none to offer. And now he'd found it in the last place he'd ever expected, in the eyes of a woman who saw him, not as a drifter or a failure, but as someone worth building a future around. As the sun dropped lower, Callahan found himself near the spring where water pulled in a natural basin carved from stone. Najui was there alone, refilling containers. She glanced up when he approached, but didn't stop working. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Callahan sat down on a flat rock nearby, watching the way the fading light caught the water. Can I ask you something? He said. Najon nodded, setting down the container she'd been filling. Why didn't you choose one of your own people? Someone who already knows your ways? Someone who speaks your language? She considered the question, her hands resting on her knees. I did choose 3 times. 3 men I thought were strong enough, smart enough. She paused and something like pain crossed her face. First one, he was proud. thought being chosen meant he was better than others, treated women like they should be grateful. I sent him away. The second week inside, strong body, weak spirit. When times were hard, he blamed others. Blamed me. Said I was the reason the people were dying. She looked directly at Callahan. A man who cannot carry his own weight will crush everyone around him. And the third Najin's jaw tightened. He loved me. Real love. But he could not separate love from duty. Every choice became about what would make me happy, not what would keep the people alive. Love like that is dangerous. It makes you blind. Callahan absorbed this, understanding what she wasn't saying. She needed someone who could see her as a partner in survival, not as a prize or a burden or a deity. Someone who would make hard choices based on logic and necessity, not emotion. You don't know me, Callahan said quietly. I could be any of those things. I watched you die. None replied. And you would not stop fighting, even when your body had nothing left. Your mind kept searching for ways to survive. That is not pride. That is not weakness. That is the thing that keeps people alive when everything else fails. She stood and walked closer until she was standing directly in front of him, up close. Callahan could see the lines at the corners of her eyes, the silver beginning to thread through her dark hair. She was maybe 5 years older than him, and every year showed in the set of her shoulders the straightness of her spine. She'd carried her people through things he couldn't imagine. You are afraid, she said. Not a question, a statement. Good. Fear means you understand what you are choosing. A man with no fear makes stupid choices. Callahan looked up at her, at this woman who'd saved his life for reasons that had nothing to do with kindness and everything to do with survival. If I stay, I need to know something. Do you want me here because I'm useful or because you see something in me that's worth more than utility? Nazone reached out and placed her hand against his chest over his heart. The gesture was firm, grounding, and Callahan felt the warmth of her palm through his shirt. I see both, and I need both. She withdrew her hand. You decide now, because tomorrow the choice becomes permanent. She picked up the water containers and walked back toward camp, leaving Callahan sitting alone by the spring. He stayed there as the stars began to appear, as the temperature dropped and the desert night settled in around him. He thought about his sister's face, about the children's laughter, about the way Neon had touched his chest, not like she was claiming him, but like she was asking him to choose himself. When he finally stood and walked back toward camp, he knew what his answer would be. The question now was whether he had the courage to say it out loud. Callahan found Najin at first light, standing at the eastern edge of camp, watching the sun break over the canyon rim. She didn't turn when he approached, but he saw her shoulders shift slightly, acknowledging his presence. He stood beside her close enough that their arms almost touched and waited for his heartbeat to steady before speaking. I'll stay, he said. I'll do what you're asking. None was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally looked at him, her expression was unreadable. Then she nodded once, a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of everything that would follow. Good. Now, the hard part begins. She led him to the center of camp where the entire group had gathered, forming a loose circle. The elder women stood together, their faces solemn. The young man who'd fought Callahan on the outcropping was there, too, his expression carefully neutral. Nazone stepped into the center of the circle, and when she spoke, her voice carried to everyone present. Callahan couldn't understand the words, but he recognized the formality of what was happening. This was an announcement, a declaration. When she finished, she extended her hand toward Callahan, inviting him to step forward. He moved into the center beside her, feeling the weight of every eye on him, and Najin placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture that seemed to mark him as something other than outsider. The response from the group was mixed. Some of the elder women nodded, approval clear in their faces. A few of the younger men looked away, their disapproval obvious, but contained. The children watched with curiosity, whispering to each other, and the lean man who challenged him met Callahan's eyes with an expression that wasn't quite acceptance, but wasn't pure hatred either, something closer to resignation. One of the elder women stepped forward and spoke directly to Callahan, her tone formal but not unkind. Najon translated. She says you will learn our ways, our language, our skills. You will earn your place here, not just by blood, but by effort. She says this is the only way the people will accept you fully. Callahan nodded. I understand. The elder woman continued, and Neon's translation became more serious. You will be taught by different members of the group how to track, how to read the land, how to move without being seen. These things keep us alive. If you cannot learn, you cannot stay. I'll learn, Callahan said, directing his words to the elder woman even though she couldn't understand him. Nazon translated, and the woman studied him for a long moment before nodding. The circle began to break up, people returning to their tasks, and Callahan felt the shift in atmosphere. He was no longer a stranger being tolerated. He was something else now, a candidate, someone who had to prove himself worthy of the choice that had been made. The lean man approached, stopping a few feet away. He looked at Callahan for a long moment, then spoke in halting, broken fragments of Callahan's language. You fight good, but fight is easy. Living here is hard. He gestured to the camp, the canyon, the vast emptiness beyond. We see if you are strong enough. Before Callahan could respond, the man turned and walked away. Not a threat exactly, more like a warning or maybe a challenge. Nazon touched Callahan's arm, drawing his attention. Come, we start now. She led him to a group of younger men who were preparing to leave camp, carrying weapons and packs. One of them was the lean man, whose name, Nadju explained, was Tsuda. The others were introduced with names Callahan struggled to pronounce, but they repeated them patiently until he got close enough. They were going to hunt, and Callahan was going with them. Tsuda looked at Callahan with something that might have been amusement. You know how to be quiet. I can learn, Callahan replied. Good, because if you scare the game, you eat last. Tsuda's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Maybe you eat nothing. They set out as the sun climbed higher, moving into the canyon lands with a silence that made Callahan feel loud and clumsy by comparison. Every step he took seemed to announce his presence. Every breath felt too harsh. But the men around him didn't mock him for it. They simply moved ahead, showing by example what quiet actually meant. By midday, Callahan's legs were screaming and his lungs burned from the pace they kept. But when Tsuda glanced back and saw him still keeping up, still trying, something shifted in his expression. Respect earned the hard way, one step at a time. And somewhere behind them, back in camp, Najon stood watching the horizon, waiting to see if the man she'd chosen would survive his first real test. 6 months changed everything. Callahan no longer thought in his old language first. The words came naturally now, shaped by the rhythm of the people around him. His hands had learned to read tracks in dust, to set snares that actually caught game, to repair tools with materials pulled from the canyon itself. The sun had darkened his skin, and the work had changed his body, stripping away softness and replacing it with a kind of lean strength that came from necessity. He sat with Tsuda near the fire, both of them working leather and comfortable silence. The tension between them had burned away during a hunt 3 months back, when Callahan had pulled Tsuda back from a ledge that was giving way beneath his feet. After that, the challenges had stopped. Not because Tsuda liked him exactly, but because he'd proven the thing that mattered most. He was willing to risk himself for the group. None approached from across the camp, and Callahan felt his pulse quicken the way it always did when she was near. That hadn't changed. If anything, it had intensified. She'd kept a careful distance during the first months, letting him integrate without the pressure of intimacy. But in the past few weeks, something had shifted. She'd started sitting closer during meals, finding reasons to work beside him, touching his arm when she spoke, her hand lingering just a moment longer than necessary. She crouched beside him now, watching his hands move over the leather. You do it like you were born doing it, she said. I had good teachers, Callahan replied. He glanced at Tuda, who nodded slightly, acknowledging the compliment. Najuan's expression grew serious. Walk with me. They moved away from the fire toward the edge of camp, where the canyon opened into darkness and stars. Naju stopped and turned to face him. And even in the low light, Callahan could see something different in her eyes. Something that made his breath catch. It is time, she said simply. Callahan understood immediately. This was the moment everything had been building toward, the real beginning of what she'd asked him to do. He reached out and took her hand, feeling the strength in her fingers, the calluses that matched his own. "Now are you certain?" he asked. "About me. About this." Nazone stepped closer, closing the distance between them until he could feel the heat of her body. "I was certain the day I found you dying and still fighting. Everything since then has only proven I was right." She placed her free hand against his chest over his heart. "You are one of us now, not because I chose you, because you chose us." 3 months later, Callahan stood at the center of camp with his hand resting on Neon's shoulder as she announced what everyone had been waiting to hear. She was carrying his child. The elder women smiled, genuine joy breaking through their usual reserve. Tasuda clasped Callahan's arm in approval, and the children, those beautiful, loud children whose laughter Neon had asked him to save, crowded around with questions and excitement. But it wasn't just Nijoni. 2 of the other women had also accepted Callahan's role in rebuilding their lines. And within the year, they too would bear children. The bloodline none had fought to preserve was no longer dying. It was being reborn, strengthened by new roots, while keeping the old ones intact. That night, as Callahan lay beside Nizonii in the shelter they now shared, she placed his hand on her belly where the first signs of change were beginning to show. "You gave up everything to be here," she said quietly. "Your old life, your old name, everything you were." Callahan thought about the man who'd been dying in the desert, lost and purposeless, convinced his life would never mean anything beyond survival. That man was gone, transformed into someone who belonged to something larger than himself. "I didn't give up anything," he said, pulling her closer. "I finally found what I was looking for." None shifted against him, her breath warm against his neck. "And what was that?" "A reason," Callahan said simply. "A reason to be more than I was." Outside, the desert wind moved through the canyon, carrying the sound of the camp settling into sleep. Children's voices still bright with laughter, the low murmur of elders sharing stories, the steady rhythm of a people who would not disappear, who would continue generation after generation. Because one woman had been brave enough to choose survival over tradition, and one man had been brave enough to choose purpose over fear. The new bloodline had begun, and with it, the future Neon had fought so hard to secure was finally definitively real. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another powerful tale from the frontier where courage and fate collide in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us keep bringing you stories like these. Your support means